Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to talk about this, which is breaking bootloaders on the cheap. So we will talk about how we can sometimes break embedded devices bootloaders with just some cheap stuff or straightforward stuff without using any hardware equipment or sometimes expensive stuff. So first of all, who we are. I'm Qais Temeiza. I'm a security researcher. I love anything related to reverse engineering. I have a strong background in low-level security research. I've done this research with David Oswald, who's an associate professor in the University of Birmingham. He has done a lot of research on embedded devices security and hardware attacks. And yes, we have David here as well. And okay, so just to give an introduction. So embedded devices and IoT devices are publicly available, and sometimes it's hard to put them in a restricted environment. So sometimes they can be processing some sensitive data or some sort of encryption keys and stuff like that. So companies started putting kind of like a logical lock on these devices, just to prevent and put some restrictions to prevent attackers from reading what's inside these devices. So they call it code reader protection. There are different naming conventions from different companies. Yes, so the bootloader that resides on the ROM of these devices is responsible of checking if this protection is enabled or not. So it will decide to impose restrictions on the device or not. So embedded bootloaders, not like any other bootloader, they will not just like initialize the device and stuff like that. They are kind of dumb, and we have to tell them what they should do. So there are some bootloader commands that we can use them to program the device, read from the device, do a lot of stuff. So in our research, we grabbed 3 embedded devices, the STM8, which is based on some 8-bit custom microarchitecture from ST Microelectronics, and the STM32 and LPC1343. They are 2 widely used devices, and both of them are ARM-based. So our research results showed that the LPC1343 has a critical vulnerability in one of the commands, which is the write to RAM command. And also, not only this device, the LPC1343 is affected, other devices from the same family in the LPC family are affected, unless they are using the memory memory protection unit. And we managed to bypass some checks in the LPC device that allowed us to break the security of the device. At least depending on our research, we found that the STM8 and the STM32 are secure against logical attacks and software-based attacks. So just to give a little bit of background about embedded stuff. So basically this graph explains how embedded devices bootloaders work. So at first, whenever the device is initialized or reset, so the first thing that it does, as we said, it checks if the code protection is enabled. And if yes, it will impose some restrictions on the device. So it will not allow, as we can see here, the read command or the write command or all that stuff. And also, there are 2 ways whenever the bootloader is initialized. It can go jump to the user code that you flashed it in it or something, or you can enter the communication mode. This mode is where you start control the device, giving it commands and stuff like that. Here where code reader protection comes in place. Here where the bootloader can control and specify which commands that you are allowed to do depending on the code protection level that is configured. So we are saying that we analyzed bootloaders, but how? So it's pretty simple sometimes. So if we have a device, definitely you'll have, not definitely, but mostly you'll have a data sheet for it. And this data sheet will have inside it the memory mapping of the device. So basically we just look at the ROM and see from where it starts and where it ends. And then we flash some code that looks like this, that reads from that address to this address, and print the contents of the ROM via UART to our serial terminal. And yeah. So let's get started with our results for the three devices. So first of all, the STM8. So the STM8 has just one level of protection, doesn't have any other levels. So just have one thing. Whenever it's enabled, it blocks any communication with the bootloader. So you cannot contact the bootloader. So it's not like, oh, if the protection is enabled, you are still allowed to do some commands. No. It just prevents you from doing any communication with the bootloader and directly jumps to the user code. Here in the assembly snippet, we can see that is loading some values from the address 4800. This is the address where the code protection value is flashed. So depending on this value here, it will compare it and decide to invoke the bootloader or run the user code. So it's a pretty simple device, not a lot of features. So yeah, so we think it's secure because it doesn't allow any communication with the bootloader whenever the protection is enabled. So we go for the STM32. So STM32, it has 3 levels of protection, from lowest restrictions to highest restrictions. So in every bootloader command function, it checks if the protection is enabled or not. That's how it checks for the protection. So here's a snippet of the assembly code. So here's the write to RAM command, the beginning of it. The first thing that it does after the push instruction, it calls the function that checks if the protection is enabled. ST microelectronics call it RDB, readout protection. As we said, different naming conventions. And then it decides to stop the command or allow it. Also, it doesn't allow any writing into memory or RAM, even with the lowest protection level. We will see how this is beneficial in the upcoming slides. Also, the user code only allowed to access specific areas in the memory. So that's all for the STM32. Now we go for the interesting stuff for the LPC guy. Yes, so here is our setup for exploitation. So it's just a UART cable, straightforward, and no any glitching or that stuff. So first of all, we will speak about the previous research that has been done on LPC family from NXP. So basically, I think last year, Chris Gerlinski done some research on this device, and he found, he managed to break the code protection level 1 on this device that we have here. And yes, but he managed to break it using a glitching attack. Glitching attacks sometimes can be complicated, and sometimes you are forced to use some expensive equipment and stuff like that. So in the upcoming slides, we will show how we broke the same level of protection with the just software-based attack without any use of hardware attacks. And also, Chris found that the code protection, like any other device, is configured in some area and some address in the flash, and it gets loaded inside the memory address 184, and then it compares this address 184 with the actual configured code protection value to decide if the code protection is enabled or not. So yes, basically this is how it checks. So yes, like the STM32, LPC1343 has 3 levels of protections, and it has CRP1, CRP2, CRP3 with more restrictions. CRP3 doesn't allow anything, as we can see. Yes, developers, when they program these devices, they don't really know sometimes the difference between these different protection levels. So they will go with the easiest one to do or to program, which is the CRP level 1. The interesting thing, unlike the STM32, the LPC1343, it still allows the write to RAM command, even when CRP level 1 is protection, but with some restrictions. It's not allowed to write on addresses less than 300 inside the RAM. Why? Because as we saw in the previous slide, the code protection value gets loaded in address 184 inside the RAM. So these addresses, basically for code reader protection values and bootloader stuff. So it allows you to write inside the RAM. Just it needs to protect the bootloader stuff. Also, another thing, the read memory is not allowed at all, and even with the lowest level of protection. So here's the memory layout of the LPC. As we can see here, the addresses less than 300, they have the CRP value and the bootloader stuff inside them. And in the other area of the stack of the RAM, we have the stack area on the other end of the RAM. So basically, after this, we analyzed the device, and we found that it's doing proper checks if you are writing on addresses less than 300 or not. But we didn't find any checks if someone is trying to touch the stack or trying to write in addresses that belong to the stack. So here, the vulnerability was here. So we managed to break the code protection using return-oriented programming, as we will see in the upcoming slides. So yes, here's the assembly code. It checks if CRP is enabled. If it's enabled, it jumps to this check to check if the address is less than 300 or not, and it jumps and executes the command if the address is above than 300. Also, here's the interesting part, no stack area protection. We can see here it starts writing to memory directly, and above there are no checks that are being done or anything to protect the stack. So we can see it just takes the input string, the bytes that we want to write, and directly starts writing without any checks. So, okay. Unlike the STM32, when you call a command, it jumps directly to the write command or to the read command or stuff like that. For the LPC1343, there is a command handler that accepts the commands, and depending on the CRP level that's configured, this command handler will decide to block this command or not. So this resulted in some command functions. They don't have any code protection checks inside them. As we saw in the STM32, like the write command, there are checks inside it. But here, since the command handler is responsible for checking, some functions, especially the read command, which is the interesting function, doesn't have any code protection inside it. So at first, okay, we found the vulnerability in the assembly, so now we want to exploit it. So at first, we tried to build some kind of exploit to exploit the device before enabling the code protection. And Yes, so we kept overwriting addresses in the stack area in order to find the return address. And we found the return address resides in 1F54 inside the RAM. So how we managed to find this? We kept overwriting addresses inside the stack area that will branch our code to some function that will print just a string in the serial terminal. So yeah, so we kept overwriting until we got our string printed. Then, OK, this is the return address. Then we enabled CRP, and we started our exploitation with CRP level 1 enabled. So at first, we called the write command. OK. We overwrite the return address of the write command and make it jump somewhere inside the read command. Why we didn't jump to the first instruction for the read command? Because we want to control the stack. We want to control the registers. So we had to bypass the push instruction. So we jumped somewhere inside this function. And then when this function ends execution, when it needs to return, there will be no valid value is waiting to get popped inside the PC. So this resulted in the device to crash, and you have to reset it. OK, that's a good exploit, and it will work fine. But sometimes you may have some interesting stuff inside the RAM, and it will be lost if you reset the device. So we thought about using return-oriented programming to branch our code, and then also to prevent the device from crashing. So basically, we made the read command to jump to some rob gadget, and this return-oriented programming gadget will jump to some ISP function. This ISP function eventually will call the command handler again and ask you to enter commands like nothing happened. Here, what we have done in the assembly level, as we can see here, the write command, the PC of it got overwritten, and we made it jump to this address, CFA, inside the read command. And when the read command needs to to return, we overrode the PC of it with our gadget address. And then from our gadget, the PC of it, we made it jump to some ISP function. And then the stack was set up that this PC of this function will have an address that will eventually jump to the command handler. So by itself, this PC, the black circle, had this address, 1060 inside it. And we found that this 1060 has a branch and will jump eventually to the command handler. So basically, we overwrote 3 PCs. And here's another representation of the attack. So these 2 slides are really very connected together. So as we can see, the PC of the read command jumped inside the blue area, and then which is the read command area, and then the PC of the read command area jumped to the red area, which is the gadget area, and then from the gadget we jumped to that purple area. Sorry. Then we found that the PC of this ISP function has this address inside it, 1061. It's the same as 1060 here, but because LPC1343 uses some mechanism that's called thumb mode, it makes the addresses +1 inside the stack. Yes, so we found this address inside the PC, so we didn't have to overwrite another PC to go to the command handler. And so our final exploit looked something like this. So here is this is how the write command looks. So we tell it write, W, and 26 blah, 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 something. This is the decimal representation of the address 1F54. And 44 is the number of bytes that we are willing to write. So we tell it, start writing from F54, and starting from that address, write 44 bytes. So at first, this device doesn't accept hexadecimal values, so we had to encode our exploit and send it to the device so he can understand it. So as we showed in the previous slides, this blue address is the PC of the write to RAM command, and we made a jump to the read command, and that green address is the PC of the read command, and then this purple address is the PC of the gadget. And as we said, we don't have to put the PC of that ISP function because by itself it has the appropriate address inside it. Here we have something interesting, the red address, which decides from where we would like to read. Okay, so since we are calling the read command in abnormal way, okay, we need to read, but from where? So we found that the third register of the read command is the register that decides from which area to read in the memory or RAM. So the value that's inside this register decides from where to start reading. So here we put the 2FC address, which is the address that has the configured CRP value in the device. So let's go and do some magic. Okay, we have the device connected here, and it can receive some commands. J means like the bootloader version, whatever. So at first we show that we tell it read 4 bytes starting from address 0. Okay, it returned back 19. 19 is the return code that means you cannot use this command. Code reader protection is enabled. Okay, so we give it the right command. Okay, as we can see here, it returns 0. 0 means the command succeeded. And then we give it our exploit, encoded exploit. So basically this is the same as this, but encoded. So we take it, boom. So yes, we managed to read even with code reader protection is enabled. So yeah, again, it gave us some encoded stuff. So we can take this stuff and decode them, and then we have basically what's inside the device. So just to conclude, we responsibly disclosed this vulnerability to NXP. They acknowledged our work, and they updated their documentation to encourage the users for using CRP level 1. And they encourage them to go to CRP level 2 and 3. So from this, we conclude that embedded bootloaders normally are easy to dump and easy to reverse engineer. And sometimes this results in finding a lot of logical attacks in widely available devices. And there are a lot of vulnerabilities, but they are just waiting for someone to find them in such devices and these devices. So yes, as we said, the main thing here is we managed to break this device with using just this cable, which can cost $5 or something. And yeah, the full exploit and the dump of the bootloader are available on this GitHub repo. We will add some more stuff later on. And yeah, that's all. Thank you so much.